Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day. Well, my Christmas tree is down. Yes, we as soon as the new year came, um, we started putting all this stuff away. It's amazing how much all that stuff um, fits in a box and just gets stored away for another year. But it was a good Christmas season. I trust it was for you as well. You know, at Bethany Church, it was an amazing Christmas this year. Just the people who came out for all of the that festival of lights that we put on. Those who came into our building, parked their car, and actually went through the lights and then came inside was over 1,300. It was just really an exceptional time, and we're really grateful for that. Just looking forward to a new year. Many of you know we're going to be starting a study called Rooted. Rooted is an opportunity for us to really focus in on some foundational spiritual disciplines that will help us in our walk with the Lord. It'll also help to solidify some community building that we have going on. It's a good way for all of us to grow together as a community, and I'm really excited about getting this started. So you'll be seeing all kinds of opportunities to do that. We'll be also walking through some of those themes in our daily, seize the days, so that we could keep all of us together on the same page. It's going to be a good time of learning and experience, and we're going to kick this whole thing off with a huge worship concert on the Sunday, the January 28th. So in just a little over 3 weeks right now, on a Sunday night, we're going to have a big worship concert, and everybody's going to be invited. We're going to just pack the place out. It's going to be such an amazing time for all of us to be together, and just kicked off this whole series with a huge worship concert. So I know our worship teams have been practicing. They're going to be representative from every one of our campuses. It's going to be a concerted effort, and all the campuses are going to come together, and it's going to be really, really good. So mark that on your calendar. That's going to be on Sunday evening on the 28th of January. Okay, so today I'd like to continue our look at these passages that deal with the shepherding of God's people and Israel. How we got here is we ended our Advent season with the prophetic word that this Jesus, who is born in Bethlehem of Judea, is called Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. In fact, the word Jesus means God saves. But it goes on also to tell us that he will shepherd his people Israel. And this idea of shepherding, while it was a very common occupation in the ancient Mediterranean, in the days throughout the writing of Scripture, that word for shepherd, sheep, they're always used metaphorically to describe also God's people, and also leaders, and in some instances God. Like we looked at Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. So this idea of the Lord being the shepherd of his people is nothing new. But God also has things to say about those whom he appointed as shepherds over his flock. And I thought this would be a good thing for us to think about for this one reason. And that is, the sheep need a shepherd. I had given an illustration during these Christmas seasons of a sheep that was found. His name was Barak. They spelled it Baarack. So it's Barak. So Barak was abandoned. and was left for quite some time to just forage on his own. And the sheep had grown wool to the point when the rescuers found him. He was all ulcerated and infected, but he had a weight of 78 pounds of wool that was on him. I should have thought about it ahead of time. I'll put a picture up for those of you who didn't see. Maybe I'll do that tomorrow. But it was just so weighed down by this wool that it had really impeded his health. And it was a vivid picture of what happens to sheep when they are abandoned, because they can't do anything for themselves. You know, I've had little Ari in the house here over the Christmas season, and you got to change her, you got to feed her, you got to roll her over. I mean, she's progressing more and more every time I get to see her, but she's still this little baby that is in need of so much attention and so much care. And it's a great analogy about God and his people and why we stand in need. So the idea of someone taking, speaking into your life, you want to be careful that that shepherd is a good one, that that they're mindful of what's going on in your life, right? Like that the people who are speaking into your life have your best interest in heart. Otherwise, they could lead people astray. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today, because it is important that as we begin this new year, we begin to tune our ears to the one who promises to care for us, right? And provide for us. And so here in Ezekiel 34 is a great passage that is found in in our Old Testament. It's a period of time when Israel is in exile, and God brings this word to Ezekiel. So if you would turn with me there, let's turn to Ezekiel chapter 34, and we'll just walk our way through this chapter. Probably won't finish it today, but we'll take a look again tomorrow. Ezekiel 34 says this. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. So here, right, the subject here is going to be these shepherds. And God is giving a word to Ezekiel now to share with these shepherds. He says, prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. But isn't that interesting? The shepherds were meant to take care of the sheep, and instead, they're taking care of themselves. I'm sure nobody listening to this program today has any examples in their life of how people have taken advantage of others. I'm sure you've had no experience like that in this world. I wish that were true, but it's not. Here it talks about these shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. And then he adds, should not the shepherds take care of the flock? So there is this juxtaposition between a shepherd who is supposed to be taking care of the flock, but they're taking care of themselves. And notice how they do that. He says, you eat the curds, you clothe yourself with the wool, you slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. Again, these are like the curds, right? It's what the sheep are producing. The wool that they grow, we use for our clothing. The meat of some of these animals is what is used to feed us. But here in this passage, everything about the sheep is to benefit the shepherd. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. The shepherd is supposed to be taking care of the flock. So what would this look like in real life? So if we take the metaphor of shepherds and sheep away and look at it as God is intending here, to see how the people are conducting themselves, you begin to realize that what's going on here is that the sheep are being abused, aren't they? They're being taken advantage of. They are being their value is only in what they can do for the shepherd. So it goes on, he says, you have not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered all over the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. So the flock here, it seems to have been very much disregarded. Remember in Psalm 23, there's it goes on, it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. It says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Think about that. Rod and the staff. The rod, right? And the staff always used to try and guide those sheep along. That rod to protect the sheep from predators. And those two instruments brought about a great deal of comfort, right? So he says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Why? Because you're looking out for me. It says, you anoint my head with oil and my cup runs over. Why would the shepherd anoint the sheep with oil? Because part of the practice, and I refer to a book called A Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. I learned a great deal. The shepherds, they would come, and as the sheep would pass them by, they would give them these inspections every day. And it could be that they had fallen and bruised themselves. Perhaps some of them were a little sick and they needed to be, given some kind of medication, taking care of them, clean out the wounds and dress them. And so all throughout Psalm 23, you anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over, right? Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. See, the reason why the sheep are in such in such a bad way is because they have been disregarded by the shepherds. And at this period of time, if you remember, Babylon had come and they had overrun Jerusalem. They had destroyed the temple, burning it, and they had then taken the people captive and scattered them throughout their empire. So when you talk about the sheep have been scattered and they have become food for the wild animals, the shepherds not really leading God's people in the way they should have gone has brought about all this destruction. And now here they are prey to these foreign nations. And they, as he says here, you have not brought back the strays. You have not searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. They're scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food. He says, my sheep wandered all over the mountains and on every hill. So it's not a very, good commentary on the shepherds, is it? The sheep, they find themselves in a poor position because of the shepherds that were over them. Listen, it goes on. It says, therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered, and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock, therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. So they didn't live up to um, they didn't live up to their responsibilities, and so those responsibilities are going to be removed. You know, these passages like this that speak of God's judgment, you do realize that God isn't blind. There are sometimes that we look and we don't think God is acting fast enough, but God does have a purpose and His will, especially as you begin to read through these Old Testament books. They're there as to provide us with examples of how God acts. You know, Israel found themselves in this position not overnight. This took a period of time, and there was this steady decline. And throughout this decline, God was raising up, His prophets to come and speak to the people and to remind them again what the word, what His covenant was all about. How he had purchased Israel from Egypt, brought them out, cared for them. All of these were signs of God's love and devotion towards them. They needed to respond by um, by keeping covenant with Him. And that covenant, again, right, is the 10 Commandments that we looked about, living in a way that demonstrated that God was their sovereign, no idols, no misrepresentation. They would honor God in the rhythm of their life by honoring this Sabbath day, as well as the way in which they would treat one another. See, this was supposed to be a mark of what it meant to be part of this flock. And as God provided leadership, they were to make sure that the sheep were being instructed, but not here. And the consequence of that is now Israel is like a scattered flock of sheep, and they are susceptible now to not only the elements but also to the wild animals that are going to take advantage of them. And all because that those that God had placed in positions of leadership have failed them. Man, we could see that happening in our current day, right? But how tragic is that when it also comes into the camp where God's people are supposed to be an example to the world, and here it's just the opposite. And so he goes on here in verse 11 and says, "For this is what the sovereign Lord says: I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. And as a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness." Wow. Um, I These kinds of passages to me, I read them and then I say to myself, God is a God who never forgets. His eye is on his people. And sometimes we're going to bear the consequences of that, right? But God is saying here, he is going to repay the evil of the day. He has taken notice, and he is meting out judgment. But he's also a God of grace. He says, I'm going to play the role of shepherd. I'm going to come and I will search for my sheep, and I myself will look after them. And then he says, as a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he's with them, I'm going to do that for my sheep. I'm going to rescue them. And look at verse 13. I will bring them out from the nations, gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land. Oh, what's that all about? Well, we know what that's about. That's about this exile and God saying that he's going to bring his people back. Do you remember? And there's this famous verse, and I'm sure when I say it, you're going to remember it. It's found in Jeremiah 29, verse 11. It says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. You know, you perhaps have seen that, printed on a plaque or on a bookmark. It's a great verse. What makes that verse even more powerful is when you understand the context in which that verse is given. Because that context, when God says, look, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, God is saying this to a people who are on the verge of being overrun by Babylon. This judgment of Babylon is because they have completely disregarded their walk with God. But God knew that his people were also a part of this. And so when they were taken into exile, God made them a promise that in 70 years, he would bring them back. If you were there on that day of calamity, when you saw your city being overrun, when you saw the temple being destroyed, people losing their lives, this imposing army coming down and just wiping everything out, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think that this would turn around? You thought everything was gone. All hope was gone. Some of these people, if they were older, they wouldn't be around in those 70 years, after those 70 years passed. And so this is saying that, no, God's saying, look, I am the God of the past. I am the God of the present. I am the God of the future. Sin needs to be addressed. But God is also a God of grace. I will bring these people back. So in Jeremiah 29:11, he gives them this promise. Ezekiel is basically saying the same thing here. Ezekiel is speaking to a people who are already in exile. And what does he say in verse 13 again? He says, I will bring them out from the nations. I'll gather them from the countries. I'll bring them into their own land. I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines and in all the settlements in the land. So there is this immediate, prophecy that God says, I will bring you back. And he does, right? All you have to do is read the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, Malachi. These are all Old Testament books. They speak of Israel coming back into the land. If you haven't read those books in a while, you should read them. Nehemiah is an excellent book just to think about leadership and how Nehemiah goes back and helps to rebuild the city and its walls so that the people of Israel could come back and feel secure in the land once again. But here God is giving them a sign of grace. In the midst of judgment, there is grace to be found. And God says he will do that. So it's not that he's powerless. Quite the contrary. God is already saying what is going to be before it even happens. But sometimes his time schedule and ours is not the same. And God is working in ways to mature us and to complete us. And it's not always pleasant. Look at verse 14. He says, I will tend them in a good pasture. The mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. There they will lie down in good grazing land, and there they will feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. Boy, doesn't that sound exactly like what David wrote in Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Verse 16, I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. That's what we want, isn't it? We want justice. But you want to make sure that you're on the right side of that justice. Because God is, look, these are his people. And he allowed the invading army of Babylon to bring such havoc. Why? Because Israel had provoked God to this. They had broken covenant with him. They were destroying each other. Let's not forget how this chapter started, about the shepherds who were taking care of the sheep for themselves, for their own purposes, and what that would have felt like for those who were being taken advantage of. No, God says, I'm going to repay that, because he's a God of justice. But because he's a just God, he's also a gracious God. And so he's going to bring them back into this land, provide them with another opportunity. Ultimately, don't you see these texts in the work of Jesus? Who, when he comes, he is like the good shepherd now, who is calling his sheep to come home, and not just from the flocks of Israel, but even from all of the countries around. In fact, we'll take a look at this on Friday, because I'm going to take a look at John 10. But in John chapter 10, what does Jesus say? But he says, I have sheep from other pastures that I must bring home. See, this is the work that is going on in the days in which we are living now. It began with Jesus, and you and I now are participating in that work. Because why? We've been given this great commission. You go out into the world, make disciples, baptize them, teach them, right? Why? Because we are continuing this work of Jesus until he comes. And he will come. And that time has been set. But only God knows that time, not you and me. What we are given is a promise. And God, in all of these passages, is telling us he keeps his promise. So, man, what a powerful word against those who are destroying the sheep of God's pasture. We'll look a little closer, though. Look at verse 17, and it begins, as for you, my flock. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will judge between one sheep and another, between rams and goats. So if you're paying attention, God is saying to them now, not only am I going to judge the shepherds because they have wreaked havoc, but the sheep aren't exactly innocent in all this either. And so I have a word for the sheep who are causing others to go astray and who themselves are living in open rebellion. Isn't that interesting? So it's not just the shepherd, but it's also the sheep. And so God has something to say to them. And so that you and I will spend some time tomorrow doing that. But I hope you leave today with a sense that God is a God of justice. God is a God of grace. He has only the best in mind for his sheep. But we live in a broken world, and people with ill content, they can wreak so much harm on others. But God will take care of that. One day that is true. But he's calling us to live a certain way. We are to be the light of the world, the salt of the earth. We are to represent him well in the world. And so that should be enough to seize each day and to remember that God is good all the time. Tomorrow we'll take another look at Ezekiel 33. But for today, this Wednesday, January 3rd, I trust that you go out, seize the day, that you find great pleasure in your relationship with him. And again, appreciate the time that we have together to just encourage one another in this way. God bless you, my friends. Lord willing, we'll spend more time again tomorrow. God bless.